pod.
Thank
This
you.
is the Thinking About Computers podcast, where we talk about what it's like to think about computers. Today, our first non-PhD student guest, Ajay Rayasam, is a venture capitalist, a monopoly man in the purest form. And yeah, it should be fun to get a very different perspective on the research world. And
Hopefully, at this point, I'm beyond that. Yes.
beyond Monopoly Man,
Monopoly
you ascended to higher
on the
heights.
path.
Yeah.
On the
Jeff Bezos level.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm a huge fan. Listen to all your podcasts.
Wow, you're
It's
one of our 5 viewers.
I actually have in preparation for this.
Really?
Yeah.
Study that.
Yeah. I'd like to be prepared, thoughtful.
Yeah.
Turns out there's nothing to be prepared for, but you know.
Right, because we would have to have questions in advance for you to get prepared.
We'll get there one day.
Yeah.
We'll get there one day. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Nice.
Yeah.
So,
should I get
venture capitalists, how'd you get into venture capitalism?
Yeah. Long story. Honestly, I guess most people won't say that they grew up wanting to be a venture capitalist, but I kind of did. So when I was I was always obsessed with startups. For whatever reason, like my dad came here as an immigrant, was a doctor, but was interested in like different entrepreneurial things, and I was more obsessed with technology. So I would follow like blogs, like Fred VC, for example, who's Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures. He wrote a blog called like Ask a VC or something. And so I would just like read about all that stuff. And like, you know, obviously there's a lot of lore and a lot of marketing around venture capitalists and, you know, amazing branding around it. So it was always in the back of my head, but I didn't really think that was possible because typically those type of roles are only available for people who, you know, went to like Ivy League institutions or like new people. And so it was never really a realistic possibility for me. But in the back of my head, I was like, that would be pretty cool. And so that was like the seed that planted in my head. But I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. So that was like my first path. So I went to Babson College, which was an undergraduate business degree. You know, they're known for being like number one in entrepreneurship or whatever. But it was like school just for being an entrepreneur. Like the entire thing was that. And so it was cool. It's a local college in rural Massachusetts in Babson Park, Wellesley. It's actually founded by an MIT alum, and who just came there and wanted to create something more practical. Because as you know, in engineering institutions, especially in research organizations, it's like a lot less about what is feasible, but more about, you know, cool ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I went there, and so worked on a bunch of startups. Long story short, I had this rare eye condition called keratoconus. I was diagnosed when I was 21 years old. And so what it means is that like a normal cornea is like this, mine is more conical. It's a genetic condition. And so I was going legally blind at that time. And so that was like the first existential moment in my life. And I had to think like, what do I want to do with the limited time that I have? Because I couldn't see much.
Yeah.
And so I thought of the bright idea of like joining a startup. I was like, might as well go for broke and, you know, try to make it. So a friend's dad had a startup. It was IT related. So they created staging environments for on-prem, you know, systems that had VMware and Windows, you know, piece of crap systems like way back before cloud was really adopted. It was like, you know, 2011-ish. And it was just a great place to work because the CEO really believed in me. For whatever reason, he just, you know, maybe the chief of staff. I worked on product there. It was just a way to be able to work while I was dealing with my eye condition. And so, I don't know if you've both been in startups or whatever, but it's always chaotic. So an absolute shit show in every way possible, and somehow you're failing upwards at times.
This does sound like my startup experiences.
And we'll get to that. We should talk about that. But I want to answer your question. This is a really long way to doing it. And so anyways, that was sort of like my first foray into it. And I came away in the middle of it. I also underwent procedures, like non-FDA approved procedures to recover from my illness. They place plastic inserts within my eye to flatten the cornea, as well as a second set of lenses. So I was, product of medical innovation. And so I could see, went from 2400 to 2025. And then that's really when I wanted to decide, like, what did I want to do with my life? And so I decided to apply myself. I wanted to be around people who built innovative things, whether it's medical or otherwise. And at the same time, my startup was going through a lot of crap with angel investors. And we ended up getting sued by the angel investor. He was the godson of the CEO. And so it was crazy. I think we can't really talk too much about it, but I realized I can't talk about it. But, just understand that, there's a lot of people out there that just have different misaligned incentives.
Mm-hmm.
So went through depositions, all that stuff. Like, it's crazy. This legal court system in the U.S. is kind of flawed in many ways. But two takeaways from there. One, I realized that I actually wasn't a great founder. I was very emotional. Like, even though I wasn't the CEO, I was like the chief of staff. I just had a hard time making objective decisions when I was so emotionally invested. So that was like a realization for me that I probably would make a good founder. And second, I was like, I really want to be a good partner to founders. Ideally as an investor, as a professional. I was like, I'm really curious about this profession because this was an unprofessional investor. And so that was the guiding light for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky enough where, I did really well in my, GREs or whatever, GMAT, I should say. And then I got into a program at MIT that was half engineering and half business school. So slowed engineering. And so got in there. I wanted to become more technical. I wanted to meet a lot of people, which is why I can relate to you both. Like, most of my friends are PhD students. I kind of understand the journey. And then from there, kind of snowballed into small internships. And there's like a lot of different sub stories from there, like a lot of hustle, a lot of funny stuff. And I can walk through all that. Like, I interviewed twice at the same firm and they forgot that they interviewed me, and like stuff.
Incredible.
Like, it's we can go down the rabbit hole, but it was just one big hustle to get to this point. And now I'm at Osage University Partners, and we invest in university spinouts, and great fun. They help me a lot. They give me a lot of freedom. You tell me all the time that I travel for academic conferences and you like this lifestyle, but I am also an investor and I do have a job, and thanks to them. So, but yeah, that's the long story short. And it was just a series of journeys that I've been fortunate to be a part of, and just a lot of really nice people who gave me a chance. And now I really love what I do.
Yeah. So what does that day-to-day actually like entail? What is it like being an investor at a VC fund? Because I see you, at conferences when you're on the road, you're just traveling around, meeting people, hanging out. I guess,
Not totally hanging out. It's always business. It's like, that's the underlying thing. It's a different style. I like to, because I wasn't a purely financial investor, everyone has their own strengths. So my strengths were like relating to people. And that's kind of how I connect. And so, but the underlying mechanism, which I'm very honest about, is like, ultimately I need to make investments and, generate returns for our investors. But, taking a step back, like the day-to-day is like not really normal. The ultimate job of the venture capitalist is to find investable opportunities based on the thesis that your partner set. So in this particular case, it's like, find the best university spinouts and the best professors, and be part of that journey. Yeah. In whatever way. And it's highly competitive, especially in open source software. And so there's not really any rules. It's sort of like your network, your personality, your firm's brand, find a way to make investments in the Joe Hellersteins of the world and otherwise. Yeah. So everyone knows in the venture world about them. And so for me, it typically starts like we have weekly meetings, like structured meetings, where we talk about potential investment opportunities every week. And then the rest of it is just meetings, whether it's virtual or not. And the whole point is to find investable opportunities. And when we have sub meetings within our smaller team, just to talk about, hey, this is what I see. This is what's happening. This is where I'm spending my time. So it's very unstructured, which I like.
Yeah.
But it's also like, in some ways, a sales job. Like, this pressure, like you have to find stuff in a short amount of time, because we can get into the mechanics of venture capital, but when you raise a fund, like we raised a $200+ million fund, you have 4 to 5 years to deploy that capital, and then 10 to 15 years to return that capital. And usually you promise 2 to 3x. So in this case, we raised 200 million. We have to generate 600 million, and you make your investments in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of pressure to get it done, especially in this weird macroeconomic environment.
Yeah.
So that's a basic thing. So, and then the rest of the time is we work remotely. So the first, like Monday to Wednesday, we're in the office in Philadelphia. So I like that you think that I go everywhere, because I do. I like that you think that I'm always there, which is the whole goal.
Yeah.
Like if I have a ton of friends in Boston and the hubs of innovation, MIT, Harvard, here in Berkeley and Stanford, it's good that you think I'm there, because it is a lot of effort to do that. Yeah. So that's what I do. In those 2 other days, I just go for it. If I find like a great investment opportunity, I just don't even think twice, because ultimately that's my job. And if you think about it, it's like, what is the next Google? What is the next Databricks? It's worth making that effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is like kind of like background on that look like? Like you're trying to assess, like, I guess one, trying to find the opportunities that are out there. Like what is the space of investable,
Sure.
Opportunities, and then also like analyzing, are these, good ideas or not? Like, how do you go about that?
Yeah. I think it's like, I'm a junior VC, so that means I'm not a partner yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's already, the firm's strategy is already set by the partners who raised the money. So they already have this concept of what it might take to generate returns.
Mm-hmm.
And every single fund has a different investment thesis. And that investment thesis could be by sector, like you said. So like database systems, for example, or climate tech, or stage. Seed stage, if you know the different terms, I'm happy to walk you through it. Pre-seed, seeds, Series A, and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And then dollar amounts, $5, $10, $15 million, depending on the fundraise. So it's this like combinatorial problem that they think that can generate more capital, and everyone has a different way of doing it. And what you're doing is convincing people that your way will generate a lot of money,
mm-hmm.
basically. And so for us, it is a broad mandate. It is challenging. So I'm part of the tech and physical sciences team, which means that I cover everything from the university that encompasses what your research is on, to semiconductors, to quantum computers, to fusion. Like, I've looked at everything.
Yeah.
And inherently, that's really tough. To be able to switch sectors, there's different business models and whatnot. I think over time, what I've done, I can't speak of anyone else, but I just focus on like the best people in those sectors and the most innovative minds, because it's pretty clear once you get into the subsectors like who stands out in terms of research.
Yeah.
But there's very few people who can translate those ideas into commercial, like viable opportunities, or are willing to do so.
Yeah, it's a very different skill than like doing good research, right?
Totally. And you have to be willing, and like I think it's an inherent desire, number one. And it's actually rarer than you think, which is like surprising. And all university students have the same challenge, which is unique technology is so cool, but you got to have a problem to solve in order for someone to purchase it. And that journey takes a lot of grit, takes a lot of tenacity, and ultimately what I look for is like, are you a magnet for talent? Like, do people want to follow you? Like, do people want to join you? And I think of Joe a lot. I think of like other people, Joey Gonzalez, like all them, like people follow them. They're great people, and people just want to work with them. They're also brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think that's a huge characteristic, and that's what's helped me kind of like navigate this world of like different sectors.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's like something that you can really assess without needing to know any like technical details of databases, right? Like that's like just a people problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It also is like my strength. So like we can get into the nuance of the investing, and like what I've learned over the last 2.5 years is that you have to play your game. So there's not like a unique like every investor is kind of unique, and they have like superpowers. So some may be able to read every single paper and like come up with brilliant ideas or commercial stuff. That's fine. That's their thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that person. There's other people who are like great financiers. There's other people who are just great hustlers or good with people.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of fall into those categories. And then when you play other people's game, you're not really that successful. So it took me a while to like be comfortable with the fact that I'm just really strong with people. And it doesn't feel like a competitive advantage at all. But it is, because it's authentic to who I am. Like, I don't have to try that hard. and I am capable of the other technical. Like I can get up to speed, or I can ask you both to help me, or beg you, basically. And like that's me, and so like we're all. It's a very competitive business, right? And so like you have to find your edge. And I always had this personal thesis, and I can go. I'm creating my like manifesto and my principles and stuff. We can go through it. But for me, it's like I always thought that I didn't have to be an asshole to be a great investor, and it wouldn't affect my judgment, even if I spend an extra half an hour with someone who I wouldn't invest in to help them to their next step. And I just always thought that you should do things that don't scale and just be a human being. And I believe in karma and all that stuff. And so I thought I'll just stick to that. Yeah.
Do you think that's uncommon in the venture capital world?
You tell me. Have you interacted with a lot of investors?
I haven't interacted with a lot of investors, but I do feel like there is a common stereotype of VC people that they are cocky, that they're dicks, and that it's like they are like sort of the embodiment of unauthentic. Like I often have this problem where I have talked to a few venture capital people unknowingly, and I have this problem where I can't tell if they're just like amazing at networking or if they are actively flirting with me, because they're so like on and just like try to be like super engaged and get you really engaged, and it's just it like comes off as very unauthentic.
It's business. It's a business school thing. Like they're really good at selling. Yeah. That's sad. It's unfortunate that you have to go through that, experience that. I think that's what I've heard as well. Like I guess I'm like unusually empathetic. Like I kind of see it from all angles. So like from, this business attracts people, or any financial services thing attracts certain type of people who are ambitious, who value prestige and other stuff. And the way I think about it is that they're just trying to make it, and like by any means necessary, and they're trying to rely on what's gotten them successful so far. And it may not necessarily be the right way, but I think there's enough individuals out there that you can kind of connect with. But I will say that a lot of people in this job, I don't think actually enjoy the job. And I think that's probably the root of it. I think they like the accolades, the attention that comes with it. They're inherently insecure people, and there's a lot of insecure founders as well. But my thing is like I think they're doing it for other reasons, and like they just that's why it's not very authentic.
The other reasons being like the prestige,
money, all that stuff. It's cool to be a venture guy. It sounds cool, but when you peel the onion layers off, I'm just like a salesperson. Really, I'm selling capital, which is like the biggest commodity you can imagine. And I think like you have to like it's a grind, and you have to really enjoy it. Like I'm here on weekends. Like I flew here to visit an entrepreneur actually, in addition to being on this podcast. No, really, like it is on my priority list. But like I can't speak for everyone else, but I just like what I do, and I think like I love people, and I love ambitious founders who are. I mean, you've worked in startups where it's so hard. It's incredibly hard. And but I will say that there are authentic people out there, but just due to sheer probability in life and like the matrix or whatever you want to call it, there's all types of different types of successful people with different personalities. But sorry you had to go through that.
Oh, I mean, it's not that much of a it's a conversation you can leave pretty easily.
Yeah, but that I guess that stereotype exists because just to go back to the empathetic piece, not everyone is guaranteed to become a partner, and so you have to make investment decisions in a short time period. You may have like 2 years to get your shot, and so it's really like consulting where it's like up and out. And so like maybe when they're under stress or whatever, that's how they react. Yeah.
So what is the like average number of hours a VC works?
Yeah, it ranges. I mean, when it comes to like a hot investment opportunity, it's like all hands on deck.
Mhm.
It's like it's a weird analogy, but it'll probably make sense to you. Think of like cramming for a final exam or like your thesis,
Mhm.
and you're like, oh my god, I have plenty of time, we can do this. And then it's like 3 days before the deadline, and you're just like, God, I just got like 10 pages done, but I need like 50 more.
Yeah.
It feels like that. Like when there's a deal, it's like you don't know, you're starting to, like an investment opportunity, I should say, with a founder. It's like you're learning, you're kind of going back and forth. Is this the right time? And then when a term sheet comes together, when a number of other VCs are interested and gets competitive, it's like you're cramming for a final exam and writing that paper all night.
Mhm.
And so I think of it as like waves. So it's like slow and then a wave.
I think a lot of lines of work are that way.
Yeah.
Academia certainly with like deadlines and stuff. But
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I've asked you this question before, but I've since forgotten the answer. I always thought that venture capital was like where the money supply stopped. Like I didn't realize that, like, do people invest in venture capital? Like, how did you get the $200 million?
Yeah. It's so, the history of venture is interesting. There's a book you should read called like VC in American History if you're ever curious.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of analogies to the whaling industry. So basically, it's a power law distribution in which few outcomes generate outsized returns.
Mhm.
So in the whaling industry, basically, you had a manager, like a venture capitalist, find wealthy people, promise them they can make more money,
Mhm.
and then they in turn invest that capital into like ship captains who go out there in the world to get whale blubber. Not everyone survived,
Right.
And it turns out like if you look at the returns distributions, it's quite similar from like the whaling industry to venture capital.
Mhm.
And so what's happened in the last 40, 50 years, venture was a cottage industry. There's only a few firms out there who are willing to take immense risk and invest in companies like Genentech or Intel or Apple, really like out there ideas.
Mhm.
And because of the enormous success, sparked a lot of interest the last 20 years, 30 years. And to the point where I think the peak was sort of like 2021, where like everyone was YOLOing. It's because like there's like so much interest around this area that these large investors want to get exposure to this type of asset class. And so like when you're a pension fund or you're UCOP, you have this broad amount of money, like more money than you can think of, like 100 billion or more. And you're just trying to find ways to grow that money by any means necessary because you want to pay for people's pensions and whatnot. And that's one category of like investor, university endowments, like schools itself. Like I mentioned that, but like pension funds, all these like large pools of wealth, sovereign wealth funds. The entire goal is to like grow that pool of money for whatever reason. And there's also high net worths. So like the interest around venture capital has motivated people who have not already made that investment 20, 30 years ago to try to jump in. And so our job is to, by any means necessary, meet as many high net worths or, whoever, really there's no rules, who would be interested in getting exposure. And so think of it, your own personal portfolio. Let's say you have X dollars, $100, I'm just gonna make it up. Usually these type of funds like want to allocate maybe 2 to 10%, maybe 20% at most of that pool, the $100 towards this kind of risky asset class. The rest of it is like in safe stuff and treasury bond stuff. That's the strategy. And so, but that pool has expanded over time because of the success of so many venture capital firms.
I see.
And so that's it. And what you're seeing is like so many new funds, including my fund, Osage University Partners, started in 2009, is because of the previous success. So, and then we can go deeper into it. There's like the macroeconomic thing of like interest rates and how that impacts people and stuff like that. But just think of it this way, like all these type of firms are trying to find other ways to grow their pool of money. And some of them just like it and want to get exposure. But you'd be really surprised if you look at UCOPs. So UCOP is like a public entity, and they release their annual reports for venture capital, like funds that they invest in. So they invested in like, I think 300 plus venture funds, like the top names. I think only like 10 of them have returned 3x their money over the past like 40, 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane, right? So it's insanely hard to make money in this business. Yeah. And right now, a lot of funds have raised a ton of money. That may not continue to be the case moving forward. We'll see. Yeah. So it might actually go back to being a cottage industry because it's super hard to make money.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you see research from a very different angle than we do, and you interact with researchers across like a lot of different fields as well, like not just computer science, but like, you know, like physics and stuff. Like, what's your what have you learned from that? Like, what do you see as kind of general trends in research and researchers versus like major differences in the ways people are thinking about research in different areas? Or...
Yeah, like broad lines, I think there's just more interest in entrepreneurship. You know, typically because of funding and just, I think probably because of funding. I think so many of their peers have gone on to build companies. It's more common nowadays. And so there's just more open-mindedness towards doing that. I think if you're a researcher, you're inherently risk averse to an extent, or an engineer by any means. And so oftentimes I see that researchers optimize their situation. They want to make sure they get tenure before taking on more enormous risk. So that's like a new thing in the last 5-10 years, right? Like people are open-minded towards entrepreneurship in general. So that's cool. It's really hard to answer your other questions because like everyone's so unique and different, especially across the sectors. But I think like just general awareness of like the differences between academic insight and actually commercialization is, I think, a huge change. I think there's hubs of innovation, but like part of the reason why I spend so much time in Berkeley and Stanford is because I don't need to really educate anyone. It's like permeates throughout the culture. Yeah. It's kind of crazy.
It's really, really noticeable.
You guys know everything about every AI deal. I'm like, what? Like you know more than me. It's like, it's just natural. And I think the difference since I've been around, like I haven't been around for that long in this job, is that I think that attitude is shifting towards other universities outside of like the hubs. I think that's a big deal. So, you know, UCSD, you know, it's just becoming more common.
Yeah, certainly in databases, I see more and more people getting interested in that. But there's a lot of commercialization in databases in particular.
Yeah. I don't know if the world needs another database, but let's go for it.
You don't want the next insert name here, DB.
You know, maybe in another podcast, or like, we'll go too deep down the rabbit hole. But like vector database, I don't understand it. So
I don't think anyone really does. Just
not to criticize other investors, but yeah, I don't get it. That'll be for part 2.
Yeah. Dive deep on vector databases. What all the viewers are asking for.
Yeah.
You might get more views if you do that. But yeah, you know what? My take is like, so how do you know, how have you seen the shift? Like, you're in your what?
3.
So since you first joined, you know, academia, like what have you noticed the general trends of your peers and research in general, especially on the topic of like commercialization?
I think it's always been a very common path out of Berkeley, especially with the Skylab. And like, yeah, for me, the really noticeable thing was moving from Seattle to here, and like how different it is just in the Bay Area in general, but especially like at Berkeley, really feels like you're just in a different world, where like people are really tapped into that sort of stuff and thinking about that stuff a lot. And like, yeah, that spectrum from like kind of like foundational research to like commercialization all shows up here, and I think that's not the case in a lot of places.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know, when I started as an undergrad, there was already a pretty late stage brewing startup in the lab. I do feel like the number of AI specific startups has decreased, just because it seems like people are a little bit more like there's been a lot more dominant players, like self-driving, for instance. Like there was a ton of, I mean, still is a ton of self-driving companies, some smaller, some larger, but now it's sort of trending more and more to Tesla's going to get it, like Waymo's going to get it.
Mhm.
So now there's much more certainty on who the big players are, and because it is so data driven, like you need data to make your models better, and people have sort of agreed on this. If people are using your product, like you have an incredible advantage because you're actively collecting data to make things better, and it would be really hard from a smaller company point of view. So I feel like that AI startups have definitely dwindled, but yeah, the like amount of general entrepreneurship is still pretty high. A ton of AI people want to do startups, a ton of systems people want to do startups.
Yeah, I mean, I think systems as a field, it just feels very naturally set up for commercialization because like the uh, the thing you're demonstrating is often that you built something and like ideally built something useful, and so you're like a lot of the steps of the way there to getting something useful into users' hands. Um, whereas like I mean, a lot of papers outside of systems, like the thing you're trying to demonstrate isn't that you built something.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, I will say ML, there are quite a lot of ML papers that are like not really going for usability, but the amount of people that focus on building a product has definitely gone up because things work now. So there's a lot more opportunity of where you can use things now that they work. So there has been a bit more of a focus on like making this usable, but it's still missing the gap of like, I'm not that good at, like, people aren't good at coding. So like usable, like the model works well, but they don't have an interface to like interact with the model or anything like that. So an actual user probably wouldn't use it, but yeah.
Do you get tired of like thinking about commercialization ideas?
I do not think about commercialization ideas.
It's great.
I mean, sometimes, but I have zero desire to do a startup. So,
and that's perfectly okay to know that, right?
oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't mind it. Doing a startup sounds incredibly stressful.
I think like it's for research projects, it's really important to know kind of what the goal is. And there's projects that if you try and view it from like a commercialization lens, you're gonna not be able to approach that problem the right way. And so like I think it's fun to work on kind of problems with really concrete use cases today, and it's also fun to work on things that like will make stuff possible much further down the line. And you just need to like really separate those things and like understand what the goal of the project is.
Well, I mean, so you mentioned like this is a really unique community, especially in the systems world, that is always focused on commercialization. What is it like to be a part of that community? Like who do you look up to there, and yeah, like talk to us about the community itself.
That's an interesting question. There's a lot of really great people in that world. I mean, that community is itself like spread across like, you know, there's database systems and there's network systems, like the networking community, and there's like the more OS and distributed systems communities that kind of like in academia are kind of split up by what conferences you go to, and people, as I guess a practical matter, can only go to a small set of conferences. So like DLDB and Sigma is the database, kind of the database community and database systems community. NSTI and SIGCOM is like the networking systems community. I think I don't know, there are people doing really impressive work in all of those communities. I mean, at Berkeley, like, you know, Joe does great work, Jan does great work, and like kind of along a different theme, but his own is really good at the kinds of thing he does. Scott Shanker does really great work, but like some of it has been commercialized and some of it is much more kind of foundational.
Those are legends, right?
Yeah. An interesting thing about Jan is I used to work with him in undergrad, and I always thought of Jan as like very heavily on the commercial end of things, which he is, but he also has like quite a few projects that are like pure purely research, like no desire to be commercialized. And it surprised me that he could be that like diverse. Like he doesn't have the need of making every single research project commercialized. He does heavily, push on the projects that are commercialized, but I haven't met too many professors that are like only focused on making startups. Yeah, and in fact, I feel like there are many more professors who get frustrated when a lot of their students want to do startups because they're like, oh, I just want to be doing research.
Yeah, I mean, if your goal was just to start startups, why did you become a professor? Like that's so much effort. Like you put so many years in, like to go down this path that you could have just started startups.
Right.
It's the reciprocity thing. I told you about that.
Yeah.
I agree with you about it, but like I have had professors tell me like that was the plan.
That's an interesting,
very circular way of doing things. But yeah,
that's an interesting route. Yeah, because I think of like going into academia as like a very kind of strange choice to make, like in computer science in particular.
Yeah. Right.
Like because like in the market in computer science is super good. There's so many jobs. There's so many opportunities, and like you don't really need a PhD to do almost anything other than be a professor in computer science.
Yeah.
And so it's like a really hard commitment to a really specific path that like makes a lot less money than most of the other paths and is probably a lot harder work than a lot of the other paths. And it's like, it seems like you ought to really love it if that's the way you're going.
I don't know. I do think that if your goal is, I want to incubate my startup, get a steady pay, and have access to like very many like highly trained individuals, a lot of which do have experience with startups, like make connections. PhD isn't a bad way to go. Like you have job security for like 5 years, you get some great feedback, you get a lot of connections. I don't think you should do it, but like it does sound like not a bad way to really hammer on a startup.
For incubating one startup, I could see it, but like to then go faculty route and
that doesn't make sense.
Like, and that was my plan all along. 12 years later,
right?
I'm like a faculty, and even just the kind of research you do in your PhD, if your plan is to go faculty versus like start a startup, is really different. And so you're like, I don't know, that's a really crazy 12-year commitment to then start a de-risked startup at the end. I see a lot of people, like faculty, kind of have what I call like diversified portfolios of research projects, and like as faculty are effectively like research managers taking on a bunch of students, and like you'll have like some, more commercializable projects and some more foundational projects and stuff like you were saying, and then you get to just have the best of both worlds. Maybe, I don't know.
What's it like to be in this place with those type of individuals? Like, what are they like? Like, do you feel like internal pressure to like produce high quality research that they would approve of? In addition to maybe something that's commercial, and people we're talking about is like some of the most well known people in this space in the world. So like, and Stoica, Joe, Hellerstein, and others. Just out of curiosity, like, how does it feel to actually be here and be a student?
Very early on for me, there was like sort of that feeling, but very quickly, I think this is just true in every environment. Like once you spend a lot of time with people, they're just people, and you just like, it's just normal, and like you get over the imposter syndrome, and you're like, yeah, I can hang. Like yeah.
I wouldn't say I've really experienced too much of a pressure to make things incredibly usable. I mean, my research does tend to focus much more on things that can be directly applied. So I think there isn't too much of a question of like, why are we doing this? But maybe because I tell every professor I've worked with very pointedly, like, I have no desire to do a startup, that maybe this gets them off my back. Or maybe I'm just a bad software engineer and they're like, she can't do it.
I feel like you're going to end up doing a startup now.
Absolutely not. It's my fear. This is the problem. I will have one of my most recent projects. One of my advisors is like, "Oh, I'm doing this startup. It would be great to implement this into our features. You should really do an internship or be a consultant." And I'm not super opposed to a short-term commitment to make something usable, but I'm I can't, I don't want to be pulled into the startup world again.
5 years later, CEO.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not acceptable.
Yeah, I can relate to my experience. So I mentioned I went to Babson and then I hustled my way into MIT, and it was a huge transition, especially when you're taking engineering classes. So I took intro to machine learning, and the first day they talked about 3 vector matrices, and I was like, I've been studied Calc BC in 10 years, and I never took discrete mathematics or linear algebra. What? I just use Python libraries. They extract away everything.
Yeah.
So it was really it was super fucked, man. It was so hard for me. But as same thing you mentioned, once I actually started meeting with people, yes, there are a few outliers. There are people who are so brilliant, it just doesn't even make sense. But they're deficient in other stuff. But most people are pretty normal, and they're going through the same stuff that you are. Obviously, you have to qualify to get all the scores and stuff like that. But once you start talking to everyone, they're just people, and that's what I try to live by. Actually, most going to the investor thing, many investors, if they think that you are valuable, you're creating a startup, they'll change their demeanor, as you mentioned. But they'll actually witness a lot of things where they'll suck up to a founder, and it's crazy. I just made it a point to not do that and just be radically honest. There was a really hot investment opportunity, and the founder presented stuff, a little while ago, and I just walked up to him and I said, "That was a really bad presentation."
Damn, go off.
Yeah. I was like, your your left hand is in your pocket. You're shaking back and forth. I could barely understand what you said, but you got to work on this. But here's how.
Yeah.
And he loved it because no one was telling him the truth.
People like feedback,
right?
Hopefully.
But, I mean, if you're not egotistical or sensitive or insecure, you just want to get better. If you're in these environments, you have a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be told the truth. I think good players want to be coached. I think great players want to be told the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people here want to be great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Side note. No. Anyways.
Yeah, so very interesting. The world of venture capital, very different.
We can go into all the things. I think if you want me to go off on investors, I'm happy to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Give us a little gossip.
Yeah. All right, wait. No,
that's what you're here for. That's what you're here for.
And live for the gossip.
Live for the gossip.
Clearly.
I think Silicon Valley is its own kind of thing, which I'm getting accustomed to. I think that people have a short-term mentality. I've rationalized what I talked about before. It's people are just trying to make it a top, and maybe they're sociopathic or whatever. But but they're inherently just trying to survive. But the things that they do are just incredible. I went to Cider. Holy crap! I went to Cider, and an investor talked to me about this exclusive event with his founder of this hot deal or whatever. And he talked to me about it for 15 minutes. And then I asked him, I was like, "Hey, this is related to university research. I'd love to join. This is cool. Let me help you." No response. He's like, "Yeah, sure. Maybe the next one." I was like, "Okay, cool." And then he walks away, and we go our separate ways. And I literally realized that he flexed on me.
Damn.
I was like, I ended up going to that event anyways because I had other friends who helped me out or whatever. But it was such a circular way of doing things. I actually ended up not talking to him at his own event. And maybe the next time we have the podcast, I can talk to you more about it, and hopefully it works out for me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But stuff like that, where it's just like, I don't understand why people are so. I get why they're competitive and insecure, but it's just like, think long term. Like, why don't we work together? Why don't we help the founders? Why don't we, partner together and focus on transparency and collaboration, and we could all, like, there's enough for the pie to like grow and be successful. That's my philosophy. There are people like that, but a vast majority are not. It's like they think it's a zero-sum game, and I think we're early in our careers. Like, I'm 2.5 years into this. Hopefully we're all doing interesting things in 30 years, and I don't care what you do, whether you do a startup or not. Like, I love people. I want to be part of your life. I want to find ways to be helpful, and I believe in good karma. And it's just not the way this place works. It turns out that being a nice person is a competitive differentiator in deploying capital.
Sure.
Yeah, never underestimate likability.
Yeah.
To get you pretty far.
And more investor gossip. There's some investors who think like, I read this paper, I'm gonna ask the smartest questions, therefore you're gonna want to take my money or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's so much more simpler than that. I think it's like a founder wants to like you, trust you, and be part of the journey. Because so many times at the early stage, they have no fucking clue what they're doing. Nobody has any clue. Like, you have a cool idea. Like, and there's so much that needs to be done in order to be successful. Yeah.
But what happens when a founder, like, you are just not happy with their progress? You're like, listen, like, you've done nothing. Like, this is going down. I see this is going down.
Call in the bad cop investor.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'll be honest, I'm not there yet. Like, I'm early in my career. I'm not in boards and stuff. So that's like a bridge that I'll cross in 5 years or so. But something that I heard recently, which I think resonates with me. So there's an investment that's happening, that I'm part of, and there's definitely already initial challenges with the founding team, but they're transparent about it right before investing. Like, they're like, I like this approach. It's like, hey, we like what you're building. These are the areas that we don't believe in that may need to change. The CEO may be great for now, but maybe at the later stages, he may not grow with it. We'll give him a chance, but I want to put it out there that this is something that I want to reconsider down the road. That way, it's not a surprise when that conversation happens. And at the end of the day, it is a performance-based business, whether you're CEO or not. It is a business. And if you have good governance and you have metrics and you're not meeting it, then we have this fiduciary obligation to make a decision. Yeah. But I think what I hate, and personally, like, in anything in my life, is like making your intents not clear. You have to be transparent. You have to say that this is the case. And I think, and if the founder wants to react negatively to that, even though they've been well warned, it's like it's very transparent and clear. Here's what you promised. Here's what you delivered. We have to make money. Right. Yeah. Like, it is a business. Yeah. And I think if that's the case, that's the way I would approach it. Like, I think that should be fine. There's many instances where that is not the case. And I can understand why everyone feels negatively about that. We've heard all the stories, whether it's Steve Jobs or whatever, like all that stuff. Yeah. A lot of behind the scenes stuff. That's the way I would operate. But, at the end of the day, we have to remember it is a business, but there's a way of doing business that I think is appropriate. Does that make sense? Yeah. No, makes total sense.
We're at the top of the hour. Yeah. But it's been great having you on. I hope come back again sometime. Where can people find you if they want to follow along with what you're up to? Are you on
any socials?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you need to start a startup
Instagram,
and try to
TikTok?
Yes, I should use Twitter more. I'm more low key, but it's Ajay Oup, AJAYOUP. That's my handle. Nice. Maybe I'll start using it. I think I don't know if there's a direct correlation between tweets and success in venture, but hopefully that is the case, because I'll start using it.
Yeah. There's definitely that connection in research. So
they just published a paper on that.
But yeah, please, like, anyone who's interested in startups and found, especially if you're in academia, it's related to our investment thesis, I'm happy to chat casually at any point. So thanks for bringing me on. I'm happy to go to part 2 into vector databases.
Yeah.
And then we'll pick it up from there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect.